Mhm. I've been doing a lot of research lately into kind of knowing when to quit or knowing when to like pivot your business or your startup or whatever it is that you're working on. Um, and I found some really interesting stuff. So there's this one article by Paul Graham. Alex, do you know who Paul Graham is?
Not really.
So Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator, which is basically like a startup accelerator. They fund startups. It's an incubator for startups where they kind of just have like a bunch of advisors and a bunch of uh, you know groups of people that are looking to start companies or launch projects, and then basically Y Combinator provides these advisors to like help them um, kind of get off the ground and just guides them in the right direction. And so before I jump into like the tenets of when to quit or when to pivot, um, I think it's apt to talk about this article first. And the article is called "How Not to Die," and it's basically, I would say, like a good preamble for um, anybody who is even thinking about like, like I'm really struggling with my business, or I'm really struggling with my startup. I would read this article first because this is kind of like what like the frame that you need to do, that you need to take with you as you start to evaluate whether or not you should close down your business or start close your startup. So let me share my screen now. I think it'd probably be useful to have this up here. Um,
Go for it.
but basically, the key things that I took away from this article were that running a startup is really demoralizing. So that's like the first thing, and that is that any new thing that you're building or launching, it's just going to be hard. There's going to be lots of ups and downs, and you have to go in with that expectation. And there was one quote in here that I really liked, where he basically says, here, I'll read it to you. This was really good. So he says, when startups die, the official cause of death is always either running out of money or a critical founder bailing. Often the two occur simultaneously. But I think the underlying cause is usually that they've become demoralized. You rarely hear of a startup that's working around the clock, doing deals and pumping out new features, and dies because they can't pay their bills and their ISP unplugs their server. Startups rarely die in mid keystroke, so keep typing. That's the first thing. I thought that was awesome. Basically implying that like if you're sprinting towards something, and I think this is actually like a really profound, it seems kind of like obvious, but I think it's really profound for one key reason. And if you're sprinting towards something and you are rapidly building a product, adding new features, and the product is undoubtedly improving, even if it's like going away, like maybe your core customer group, you're adding features that confuse them, or you're doing all this stuff that they don't, necessarily resonate with. Ultimately, you are building something that is very likely specialized for some target market. And now, obviously, you don't want to be like, I think it goes without saying that like adding random stuff or stupid features that don't make any sense is never going to be a good move. But if you are doing like the table stakes practices of communicating with customers, building quickly, releasing quickly, not shipping low quality product to the market, it's very hard to create a company that has no value. Even if there are competitors in your space that are doing very similar things, I think it'd be very, very hard for that company to die. And that's what he's saying here. He's basically saying startups rarely die in mid keystroke, so keep typing. I really like that. And then there was one other piece of this that I thought was just really helpful. And it's the next paragraph. He says, if so, many startups get demoralized and fail when merely by hanging on they could get rich. You have to assume that running a startup can be demoralizing. That is certainly true. I've been there, and that's why I've never done another startup. The low points in a startup are just unbelievably low. I bet even Google had moments where things seemed hopeless. Knowing that should help. I think that's really powerful because, again, it's like going into this with the frame that like the lows are going to be there. The key is to keep going, or to follow the next set of questions that I'm about to lay out in the rest of my segment here about how to assess whether or not you should close down your startup. But I think just having this frame should be really, really, you should have this frame 100% when going into this kind of analysis. So that's kind of the first thing. I wanted to just give this article. Alex, do you have any thoughts on this kind of thought process? Like, how do you feel about when things become challenging? Do you think that's like a sign that you should pivot, or do you think that's just expected and you need to persevere?
Is this kind of like just the reason they die is more of because of the trough of demoralization rather than other things, pretty much? Just with
Well,
motivation and
yeah, so this is also this article basically details a few things that you don't want to do if you want your startup to succeed. And one of them was just expect things to be demoralizing, because if you're not, you're going to think that when you hit those lows, that means things aren't working and you need to close the doors. But he's saying is actually no, these lows should be expected.
hmm
Not ignore them, but like, be aware that they're going to happen, even if your startup is still going to be a big winner. He says, I bet even Google had their low points.
right.
So the next things he says are also like other things to do, how not to die. But before jumping into those, like, how do you feel about this idea of, I don't know, trusting your gut when it comes to how your business is doing, or your startup, or maybe you're building something, you have no customers yet and it just feels hopeless at this point. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, one thing that I think is so I have two thought streams on this. I'll go with the first, maybe not as optimistic one, and that would be that sometimes I believe in following my gut and following my intuition. So when I get red flags or, reasons to be demoralized, a lot of times those are founded in something. You're feeling that way for a reason. And maybe you are just hitting a very strong wall. If I'm going up and trying to fight a 300-pound person and I'm getting my crap beat out of me, I'm starting to feel demoralized, right? And it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't pick that fight. Those signals are there for a reason, right? Now, so I do believe in following your intuition and following the signals that you get, and being aware of those. However, whenever you want to achieve something extreme, if I wanted to beat this 300-pound person in a fight, per se, what if I had relentless optimism and confidence? I just believed I could do it, and I just kept a positive attitude and a positive mindset and continued through those potentially negative signals and that potential demoralization, right? Well, there's a possibility that I come out on the other side finding out the tactics and techniques that are needed to achieve that result and beat that 300-pound person in the fight, right? Maybe I discover their weak points and I eventually discover, the strategy that will win, right? And maybe I won't have a huge win rate, but at least I got the win at some point, right? Or maybe I figured out a tool. Maybe I ended up having to create a freaking, prosthetic addition to my body that allows me, or like I implanted a Neuralink in my head that allowed me to like pretty much be God mode and beat him, right? When there is a will, there is a way. So if you continue with relentless optimism, even in the face of huge adversity or even minor adversity, whenever you're getting negative signals, if you just continue with that relentless optimism and confidence through those demoralized periods and just believe that you can, where there's a will, there's a way. So, yeah, those negative signals are there for a reason. Maybe you are up against some serious challenges, but if you want to really make this thing work against all odds and, sacrifice what you have or, figure out every single possibility that this can work, well, there's a will, there's a way. So I would say, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think there's I tend to follow the mantra of trust your gut when it comes to people. I don't necessarily like the idea of trust your gut when it comes to anything that's like sort of analytical or like fact-based, anything that requires you to like assess facts, or anything that frankly didn't come from like a social interaction. I think trusting your gut can often be uh, a bad thing. And so I definitely agree with Paul Graham here that, being demoralized is something you should expect. It does not mean your startup is going to fail. It should be expected. But I do think that, your gut can be a proxy for, yeah, for failure, impending failure, right? It can be true sometimes, right? Like there definitely are cases where you thought something was wrong and it turns out that it was. Um,
Cutting
but I
losses
think
has
there,
a place, right? Cutting losses has a place, but where failure is not an option, then yeah, you gotta. you go against your gut there, you know, and look at data and figure out a way.
Right. And the other side of this that's just true is um, if there's that quote, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right.
Right. Yeah, I love
So
that
in
quote.
other words, if you think it's not going to happen, then you're definitely like there's no chance of success. Like if you don't believe, then there's just no chance. Period.
Yeah.
Um, you have to have both, and the low points will come. The question is whether or not you'll be able to rally from those. Okay, so that's kind of the first piece. I will go through very quickly go through some of the other items that he talks about in here. The main one being really I'm going to cover one, and that's just distraction. So he basically talks about how the main reason people die is or sorry, not the main reason people die. The main reason startups die is when people that are running the startup get distracted. I love this section he has here with he says, let me mention some things not to do. The number one thing not to do is other things. If you find yourself saying a sentence that ends with, but we're going to keep working on the startup, you are in big trouble. Bob's going to grad school, but we're going to keep working on the startup. We're moving back to Minnesota, but we're going to keep working on the startup. We're taking on some consulting projects. You get the idea. So the point is like, as soon as you put the startup as like an item on your list of things that you're working on, in like among other things, you've lost. It's never going to be successful because you need 100% focus. And this is not just from like an effort and progress perspective. Like obviously it's possible to make progress on all things, but you get huge compounding effects from working on one thing and only thinking about one thing because you'll just problem solve more little issues as they come up if you have 100% of your focus on one thing. So I thought that was my favorite other piece is like, if you if one of your explanations ends with, but we're going to keep working on the startup, you've done something wrong. Reassess, try not to do that. Or shut the startup down. Don't keep it on the back burner and keep,
Yeah.
burning investor money.
I think these phrases kind of indicate that it's just taking a back burner. And yeah, like your thing really shouldn't be like a side hobby or something, right? Like you should be all in, right? Theoretically. Like, I mean, yeah, you're gonna be moving to Minnesota, but that's not like the first thing, like, yeah, we're doing this and this is our like kind of main shift. And we're also keeping this going in the background. Like it's just the phraseology of that. Like, sure, you can move to Minnesota, but like, it's kind of the phraseology behind it. But I also wanted to interject one other thing, and it's like Elon, right? In those after dark, motivational Elon edits, there's always that clip in there of he's like, I'll die before I give up, or like literally like he's said, in different ways, like paraphrasing here, but he's gonna be like, dude, like we're gonna go to Mars or die trying, like it's just that relentless optimism of I'm going to find a way. And like, I mean, look, like statistically, there is a possibility that it doesn't happen, but he will die, before that possibility arises. So it's like, yeah, make it happen or die trying pretty much. And if you're that all in, like, yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. So,
And I love that you brought that up because the stress or the reason people think about closing down startups is ultimately like if you think about any business or thing that you're working on, the reason that you want to close it down is because you in some way you feel like it's your like biology, right? Your gut telling you you are misallocating like energy
yeah,
resources and you
yeah,
need to put this energy somewhere else because this is unproductive use of energy. And so there's just like this internal stress of saying like there are other things you could be doing, and that's why you feel conflicted because for
yeah,
whatever reason you feel maybe it's not true, but you feel like the thing that you're doing right now is unproductive and it's not going to yield results. But when Elon says we're going to Mars or I'm going to die trying,
yeah.
he's completely said
He's,
there is nothing else that
yeah,
I'm just going to free myself of those other things to worry about. I'm just going
yeah,
to take them off the plate and completely release that burden and say, there's nothing else that I can do. This is what I'm chained to. So I
yeah,
must do this. There's only
yeah,
one thing I can work on, even if it seems hopeless. I'm going to die trying. I think that's like a super motivating thing is just like releasing that burden of saying all of these other things that I could be doing, whatever, like just let them go,
yeah,
let them float away.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
the thing I've committed to.
Oh, I can make more
I
money
think that's
doing
good.
this or more money doing that. It's like, no, he's playing
Yep.
the infinite game. Like he's not just
Mhm.
doing this, like, yeah. So
And you know, something else, like, let me tell you this. If you, you know, this is a David Goggins quote, but he says, nothing wants to stand in the way of something that is relentless.
Yeah.
Even if that, you know, you're working on something that seems trivial or seems small, um, you know, this is not an advice an investor would give you. Like, this is advice I would say, like,
Yeah.
almost just psychological for you, like living your life. Anybody out there who's working on something,
Yeah.
um, if you can be the relentless competitor in the space of whatever it is you're working on, like maybe it's some like app to help with contract like life cycle management, some
Yeah.
obscure like B2B tool. If you are the relentless competitor, it's going to be very hard to beat you, period. Because as an individual will learn more than even the most experienced CEO in that space if you are relentless and you are in that space for 10 years. That CEO may have taken the CEO job for the contract lifecycle management competitor, you know, 3 years ago, and they're new to the space, but they're an experienced CEO. Like, you're going to know more than them. You're going to be contacting customers more. You're going to know where the puck is moving in sort of like the technology world. So I would say, like, nothing wants to stand in the way of something that is relentless. So if you feel like it's worth working on, just like release the burden of the other things that you could do and just be relentless with it.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to kind of pivot back into the other thing now. So now, kind of switching gears, when should you assess whether or not to quit? So now this is kind of like a resource allocation decision. Like, is this thing worth pursuing? And so I would say the following. On the last topic, if you at the, you know, first principles assessment that like this thing that I am working on is worth pursuing, and you have decided that you should be relentless, overcome the challenges, be the relentless competitor. Nothing will want to stand in the way and compete with you. But if you are looking for a way to assess whether or not your business will work, and you are trying to, you know, maximize your financial gain in the near term, and you want to just make sure that you are building the right thing. This is Alex Hormozi's framework for deciding whether or not your business should be shut down or whether or not you should pivot. He basically says, and it's very simple. He basically says, when you start something, or if you've already started something, document what the assumptions are that you are using to decide whether or not your business is worth building. So, in other words, I'm building a contract lifecycle management tool. My assumption is that right now, 80% of businesses are doing this manually. And 80% of businesses are doing it manually and they don't like it. It takes up at least 45 minutes per contract just to get it set up. And then it takes, you know, another 6 weeks just to go back and forth with like the, you know, your counterparty to build the contract, modify terms, negotiate the terms, and then eventually get the contract executed. If your assumptions say that these are the problems in the market today, and nobody is addressing them, or at least the competitors that are addressing them are very expensive, and that there is a whole market that's unaddressed, you have this set of assumptions, and you can take those assumptions and you say, all right, here is the opportunity based on these assumptions. And that opportunity is a void and it needs to be filled, and that's what my product is going to do. He basically says, if you have a feeling that your business isn't working or you're not getting usage or whatever it is, reevaluate your assumptions, or go write down all of the assumptions you thought you had when you started your company and then reevaluate them based on the current market landscape. And he basically says, if those assumptions have changed and they affect the opportunity size, meaning like how big that opportunity is, or if that void is even still present, then you should go and decide whether or not you should shut down your company. And I would say, like, you need to decide whether or not there is an ROI based on that opportunity size, if it has shrunk or if it's disappeared or moved or whatever it is. I would add one thing to it, and that is you should talk to your customers. If you have customers or you have users or you have a target market, go talk to at least 20 of them. If you can talk to 20 customers and you can say, like, these are my assumptions, like here's what we're building and we want it to help a business like you. Is this true for you? Do you feel like you spend a lot of time building, you know, working on contracts with counterparties or doing XYZ? When was the last time you did it? Was it painful? Did you, you know, do it? Was it an annoying process for you? So in other words, retest, like reevaluate your assumptions, and then go talk to customers. Ultimately, the customers are your source of truth. So and then of course they vote with their money. So I would go talk to your customers and ask them to pay for what you're doing. Say, if I built this and I had it ready right now, I have a link. I could send you this link right now. Would you sign up and bill your card $20 a month if I could promise you that you will spend maximum of 5 minutes on contract lifecycle and you don't actually, it's all automated from there? Would that be something that you would pay for? So that's my thing. And then the other point that Hormozi makes is that everything is a pivot until you stop. So you can reevaluate your assumptions, but just because those assumptions may not hold anymore, you might want to just pivot. Like if the opportunity space has just moved because like maybe the competitors in the market have already occupied the previous opportunity space that you had, and the one that you're going after may have just like shifted to like a different market industry vertical, or maybe it's up the stack or down the stack. Just decide whether or not a pivot makes sense. Say, okay, well, actually, if we pivoted and did focus on this market, maybe this has utility here. Or maybe the tech stack that we built has a lot of utility in like the loan origination space. And it's really just like a technology play rather than like sort of a service play. So I would say that a pivot might be also something you look at. So essentially, everything is a pivot until you stop. I thought that was Alex. What do you think of that? Like retesting your assumptions and then looking at a pivot as a first move instead of fully like stopping.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes like it yeah, if the most problems are pretty difficult, but at the same time, we're not, doing rocket science here. A lot of us are in businesses where we're not, say a dog trying to break out of a stainless steel cage and all of the wall, or a stainless steel box, and it's like 20 feet deep of stainless steel on either side. Like most of the problems that we attack, we have like decent reason to believe that we can actually achieve it, right? So, you know, it's kind of what I'm saying is a lot of the things we're trying to do or solve, they're hard. They're very hard because any business is difficult, but it's not impossible. So I think we just need to reallocate more intelligence, more thought, more effort, and potentially pivot our strategy if we find out that, hey, us banging our head against the steel box isn't going to work. We're going to have to come up with some device, then that's kind of a pivot, pivot your strategy or pivot what you're trying to do. So yeah, I think pivots are important because you have to adjust, but hopefully you're not giving up on solving the problem as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, do you have any